When Joseph Stalin was tormenting his people and killing them by the millions, he was not a very tall man. Stalin was not his real name. It was a nickname that was given to him of the steely countenance. It is fascinating when he began to torture his own people. I told this story to the faculty at the Center for Geopolitical Strategy, and there was pin drop silence. Here's the story. A Western diplomat went to see Mr. Stalin and asked him how he planned to have his people continue to follow him when he was torturing them like this. Stalin never gave this diplomat a verbal answer. He called a waiter and asked the waiter to bring him a live chicken. He took the live chicken and put that chicken under his arms and started to defeather that bird till it was completely denuded. The chicken by this point was quivering and trembling in his hands. He took the chicken and put it down, picked up a piece of bread and walked away from that chicken as the chicken was quivering there on the ground. And the chicken hobbled over towards Joseph Stalin, nuzzled between his trouser legs for warmth. Stalin bent down with a piece of bread and the chicken started to peck away at that bread. And Stalin looked at his visitor and said, "Do you have your answer?" "I tortured that chicken. It will follow me for food the rest of its life." He said, "People are like that. You torture them and they will follow you for food the rest of their lives." Very few journalists and diplomats had the courage to call him for who he was. Malcolm Muggeridge did in his book Winter in Moscow. And when he came back, he had changed his complete position on what a government like that was, which treated its people in such a demeaning way. But that's precisely how he had started to define them. People were a means to his end. His ends were a clenched fist, which was the last gesture before he died, a fist towards the heavens. Young people, ladies and gentlemen, when you look at God's word, Moses gave his people 613 laws. David reduced them to 15. Isaiah reduced them to 11. Micah reduced them to 3, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. So Micah took 613 laws and brought it down to 3, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. When Jesus was asked by an antagonist what the greatest commandment was, it is amazing to me that he did not reduce it to 1. It's profoundly moving to me that he did not reduce it to 1. He could have, but he reduced it to 2. To love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these 2 hang all of the laws and all of the prophets. 613 laws were put on 2 pegs. To love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Why did he give us 2 and not 1? Because of the first, the second necessarily follows. Without the first, the second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. You don't have the essence of what the created order is, then loving your neighbor becomes purely an option for you and for me. Jesus said it is not an option, it is a necessary corollary. It follows from the first. You see, your ethnicity, your race, who you are, is your distinctive gift by God. It is an inviolable gift that God has given to you. When he talks of all of the nations, when Paul gives his sermon there in the book of Acts, he talks of all of the nations that were there and how God had called him to take that message to every nation and every tongue and every tribe. You are a creature created by God, and there's a segue I want to give to you here before moving to the second ramification. I want you to follow me carefully now. Not only are you of essential worth with humanity, in that essentiality, there's a particular worth to you. I want you to follow this very carefully. So So we don't get lost in this whole thing that we call the mass of humanity. There is an individuality to you. In fact, it comes from the Latin indivisible. You cannot be broken up. You come as a unique composite. You are irreplaceable. A position can be refilled, but you will never replace a person. There's a uniqueness to them. My son, who's here in the audience, went to Taylor University, and in 2006, Taylor University had a terrible tragedy take place. On a weekend, some of the students were coming back from a weekend, I don't know where they had gone for some work over the weekend or what, and they were driving back in a van, and if I remember the story, at least parts of it correctly, I think it was a truck that crossed over the median and slammed into them, and most of them in that van were smashed to death. They were killed. One of the students survived. All the parents were informed. They came and picked up the corpses of their loved ones, and funerals were held. But the Van Ryn family was told that their daughter Laura was still alive, albeit hanging on by a thread. So the Van Ryn family hung around the bed day after day, week after week, and I think it was her boyfriend who was also present. And as she was beginning to regain consciousness, he started to ask her questions, but none of the questions they asked her were making any sense within the context of the Van Ryn family. And I think it was a boyfriend who one day said, you know, there's something wrong here. Either she's completely out of it, or I don't think this is Laura. And the parents were upset, saying, what are you talking about? The brain is damaged, she's been hit hard, give her some time. He said, no, something is wrong. And one day this gal looking up with her matted blonde hair and all says, I don't understand why you keep calling me Laura. I am not Laura. My name is Whitney. I'm Whitney. There's silence in the room, and they contact the authorities in the university, saying, was there a Whitney in this van? I said, yeah, but she's been buried. I said, no, you better come on over here. So they talked to her, and they bring in the coroner and asked him if he'd done a DNA test on the burials. He said, no. Said, do you know who this is? And they did a DNA test and found out she was indeed Whitney Serac. She was not Laura Van Ryn. But there was already a grave marker with Whitney's name on it, although she was here, very much alive. And all of a sudden the Seracs are contacted and told, your daughter is alive. And the Van Ryns had to pack their bags and go back and go to the grave and realize that their daughter was actually buried there, and the change of the name had to take place on the marker. Every life in that van was valuable. But there were relationships and a particularity. That's why we are given names, not to confer individuality, but to recognize the individuality that is already there.